Deep in the heart of Siberia, right on the frozen banks of the Ob River, there's this little island. It doesn't have an official name on any map, but trust me, history has given it a very, very dark one. Today, we're diving into the story of a forgotten tragedy from the Stalinist era.
Yeah. Soviet maps never really bothered to chart it, and for decades, its story was completely silenced. But for the people who lived nearby, for the few who knew what really happened there, it had only one name: Cannibal Island. It became the stage for one of the regime's most horrific experiments.
So, picture this. It's May of 1933, and this is roughly the number of people who were rounded up, deported, and just abandoned on this tiny, remote little strip of frozen, swampy land.
And when I say abandoned, I mean truly, utterly abandoned. They were dumped there with no food, no shelter, and not a single tool to build anything. What was supposed to be a brand new agricultural settlement, well, it became a living nightmare almost instantly.
Now, this isn't some campfire story or a spooky local legend. This is a real, documented historical event. It was even investigated by the state itself, and then buried for over 60 years. So, the big question is, how? How on earth could something like this actually happen? Well, the answer really lies in the political machine of the Soviet Union at the time. It was a system built on quotas and social control, and it created the absolute perfect storm for this kind of catastrophe. You see, Stalin's policies, like forced collectivization, had driven millions of people out of the countryside and into the cities. To get a handle on it, the government brought back this internal passport system, but peasants couldn't get them. And if you were in a city and got caught without your papers, for any reason at all, boom, you were instantly a criminal. And the human cost of this system was just staggering. I mean, take this guy, Kuzma Salikov. He was a loyal, dedicated member of the Communist Party. He just stepped out to the market one day, forgot his papers at home, and got swept up in a raid. And just like that, his old life was over. He was put on a train and never ever saw his family again.
And it shows you just how random and cruel these arrests were. The police had quotas they had to fill, and they really didn't care who they grabbed. A 12-year-old girl? Yup. A decorated factory worker? You bet. A 103-year-old man? Even a pregnant woman who actually had all her papers in order. It didn't matter. They were all just numbers to fill a quota.
So all these people, now called deportees, were crammed into these awful train cars and shipped east. The city of Tomsk, which was supposed to be a transit point, was completely overwhelmed. We're talking about nearly 90,000 people dumped there with no camps, no food, no plan whatsoever. So the desperate local officials came up with a solution: just push them further north, onto an island.
And that brings us to the island itself. This is where a massive bureaucratic failure turns into a scene of absolute, unimaginable horror. And it happens almost overnight.
Okay, so you really have to appreciate the complete disconnect here. The plan, right? The one dreamed up by some bureaucrat in Moscow was for a thriving, self-sufficient settlement. But the reality? It was an uninhabitable, frozen swamp. They were promised tools and resources. They got nothing. This wasn't a chance to build a new society. It was a natural prison, surrounded by an icy river.
And the breakdown was just immediate and total. After just one single night in the freezing cold with zero shelter, almost 300 people were found dead. When some food finally showed up on the third day, what was it? Raw flour. People were so desperate they ate it dry and choked to death, or they mixed it with dirty river water, which just caused an explosion of dysentery.
And to put that 200 grams of raw flour into perspective, that was significantly less than the starvation rations that were given to prisoners in infamous camps like Auschwitz. The system wasn't just failing them, it was actively starving them to death. So what about the guards? Well, this slide reveals everything you need to know about them. They had absolute sadistic power. They would literally shoot prisoners for sport from their boats. They traded bits of bread for sexual favors. They saw themselves as gods ruling over this frozen hell. And this quote, it just sums up their whole mentality perfectly. Within just a few days, any last shred of society was gone. No food, no hope. And the strong, often career criminals who had been mixed in with everyone else, they began to prey on the weak. Organized gangs started to form, and they began hunting people. This is the actual, harrowing testimony from a woman who somehow managed to escape.
She told the villagers that her attackers kept her alive on purpose, arguing that, quote, fresh meat lasts longer. They were planning to eat her, piece by piece.
And when some of these cannibals were finally caught and questioned, their confessions were just chillingly casual. This man described the process with the detachment of someone sharing a cooking recipe. It shows you just how warped the human mind can become under these extreme conditions.
And here's the really twisted logic that some of them use to hold on to a tiny piece of their own humanity. They actually rationalized murder as a form of mercy killing, a way to convince themselves that what they were doing wasn't just monstrous. It was this sick, desperate justification for something completely unjustifiable.
For an entire month, this horror just continued. When the island was finally evacuated, the whole story was immediately buried. So, how did a state secret this dark ever see the light of day?
It's all because of one man, Vasily Velichko. He was a loyal communist who heard these disturbing rumors and decided to conduct his own unauthorized investigation. He wrote this incredibly detailed, damning report and sent it all the way up the chain, even to Stalin himself. But instead of justice, it led to a cover-up. Velichko was fired and his report was locked away in a secret archive.
And there it sat, for over 50 years. It was only found again in the late 1980s during Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, or openness. But the full, horrible story wasn't officially published until 1994, a whole lifetime after it happened.
And the final numbers are they're devastating. Of the roughly 6,700 people sent to Nazino Island and the settlements around it, more than 4,500 died in that first month alone. And many of the so-called survivors died right after being relocated. The death rate was well over 75%.
Today, the island is overgrown, and from a distance, it almost looks peaceful. But every single year, local people travel there to place flowers at a simple wooden cross. It's a small act, but it's a profound act of resistance against forgetting, making sure the memory of those victims is not erased.
The Nazino affair is just such a disturbing case study. It's not about a single monster, but about a monstrous system, a bureaucracy that cared more about quotas than people and treated human beings like statistics on a page. It leaves us with a critical lesson and a question that really echoes through history.